Hi, the next three tips and tricks are going to be on sharing the gospel with kids. This week we're going to look at the don'ts. Next week we're going to look at some do's. And then the third week I'm going to give an example of a really simple gospel presentation. So, very quick, some don'ts. Don't wing it. Practice beforehand. Figure out what you're going to say. Figure out how you're going to simplify some terms and work on it beforehand. The second don't is don't use metaphors. Stuff like invite Jesus into your heart, or a justification by faith. The big theological terms aren't really that helpful with little kids. They over concretize things. It gets confusing. Choose just simple, straightforward language instead. Third is don't manipulate by overdoing the negative emotions. Kids' faith is so genuine and so real that there's a big risk of manipulating them into that trust, that faith, by exposing their fears or over exaggerating suffering. So there's some ways that you can over exaggerate suffering. You can over exaggerate Jesus' suffering. Yes, his dying on the cross was painful. Yes, he received God's punishment, and that was big. But if you over exaggerate, if you go into too much detail, then kids' feeling of guilt and sadness would lead into their commitment, and that's not real. Or don't over exaggerate hell. Hell is very real and very painful, but it is something that you can talk so much about the fires of hell and how horrible Satan is, and try to scare the kids, and then they'll come to Jesus just because they're scared. And we don't want that. We want them to come to Jesus because of his love. So don't over exaggerate the suffering of Christ's death or the suffering of hell. Keep it simple. Be passionate, but keep it simple. So prepare in advance. Don't wing it. Don't go crazy with the metaphors. Don't over exaggerate suffering, whether it's Christ's suffering or the suffering of hell. And finally, um, don't push a response, whether it's by using social pressure, by asking kids to raise their hands and look around, or asking kids to come up front, or over exaggerating and going too big on their prayer and saying that their prayer saved them, and if they just pray this prayer they will be saved. What I do is I say, I believe these things, and I'm going to pray and tell God I believe these things. And if you believe those things too, you can just say it out loud with me. And that way, kids get a chance to respond, but they don't feel like their response is what saves them. And they don't feel the pressure of just responding so that you will be happy or that other kids would notice it. But they will just respond because that's what they believe too. So um, if you don't push a response too much, and you don't create over exaggerate the suffering aspect, you won't manipulate kids' feelings, and you'll give a chance for their faith to fully blossom. And if you don't use crazy metaphors or big theological terms, and if you prepare in advance, you can present the gospel in a way that kids can understand. So next week we'll talk about some do's, and then I will give a very simple gospel presentation.